Welcome back to the All I Ever Wanted podcast. Today's a big one. I cannot stress this one enough. We get so many questions, so many people are concerned. Normally we get a lot of questions on the investments, the inflation, the recession type stuff, but today this is going to focus on a lot of the why and what you should not do if you want to get through the next 2-3 years without massive negative implications. So I'm going to get into this. This is one of the few times I've actually made notes to make sure I get the points across without deviating too much, because this one has to stay serious. I'm not trying to scare anyone. We're not trying to scare anyone. You just need to understand what's coming, whether you don't like it or not. You can't cancel inflation and recession. You can't. It doesn't care how you feel. It doesn't care how you identify. It comes after you regardless of your gender, your race, your ethnicity, your religious beliefs. Inflation and recession are coming after you equally. So understand why it is important to get as much knowledge as you can. I'm going to rip through these points. I've tried to make it as on point as possible, just so I can get the point across clearly, concisely. If you have any questions at all, please toss it in the comments and producer Mac will answer for you. And if he doesn't have an answer, we will find someone knowledgeable enough to get you the answer that you're looking for, because this is so important. So I don't know what we're going to title this podcast, but it's basically saying, please do not make any significant purchases, high dollar purchases in the next 20 to 24 months. I'm going to go into why now, and I'll get back to it later on. So, as much as we think we're living in a capitalistic continent, America, whatever you want to call it, it's no longer true. We haven't lived in a system like that for quite a while. We no longer base our growth on the selling of goods and services. It's based on credit and the borrowing, lending of money. In the past, value was added to your country by saving and investing money that you actually earned. Now, the majority of the population lives on credit and does very little investing. Now, you can already start seeing how that's a problem. So where does this lead when fake money is lent out to artificially prop up the economy, and the majority of people are using it to purchase depreciating assets? Well, if you keep borrowing money at higher and higher, increasingly higher rates, greater inflation is on its way. So greater inflation, what does that actually translate into for you? Well, I don't know what tax bracket you're in, but if you're already in one of the lower tax brackets, this means soon you're not going to be able to afford to eat. And I know there's a bunch of people out there that are already there, and understand that inflation is going up more because more artificial money is being pumped into the system with different programs. And yes, it sounds like it's alleviating it in the moment, but that just means prices go up afterwards. The lower end of the middle class will see their taxes go up because eventually money has to be recovered. You can't keep printing it, otherwise a loaf of bread's $20. What do you have? What is the country's asset? Country's assets are its taxpayers. So it has to increase it. Middle class always takes on this burden. So the lower end of the middle class now becomes the lower class because they're being taxed more, meaning they have less, so they can't actually buy as much as they used to before. But they're still in as much debt as they were before. So they have to pay off their debt is higher, they have to buy that loaf of bread, the loaf of bread is higher, now they have nothing left, now you have a bigger, lower class income instead of a lower middle class. How does this affect the upper middle class? Well, this is completely determinant on what they did with that extra income that they've had, revenue, however they attained it, whether they were employees making more, business owners making more, entrepreneurs, investors making more. What happens to these people? Well, if they were well invested, they're going to just become rich. So they are taking care of themselves, but they planned for this years in advance by making sure they did the right things with their money instead of just indulging and, spontaneous therapy, retail, all that kind of stuff. The impulsive purchasing, they held that back and invested where they should. The upper middle class that spent too much and just got higher into debt because they had a higher amount to leverage against debt, they're really in trouble, because those people are going to have to pay back their debts. They're going to be going bankrupt, and they're also going to now be in the lower end of the middle class, or even end up completely broke and bankrupt. You see how this is not sounding really good for anyone who didn't prepare for this? Now, we went through 0809. We knew the problems that happened there. All we've done is do it again with higher credit. So it's not like we weren't warned. This technically happened again in 13 and 14, but because the way the world was working, we didn't really notice it as much. A lot of people around the world did, but here in North America, not so much. The rich, and don't get mad at them, because they're not rich because they were handed money. They're not rich because their parents started that way. These are less than 4% of wealthy people started off with more than 100 grand. So understand that most people have built. And we're not trying to play people against each other. But the people that knew how to get rich because they acquired the knowledge to make the right moves, to invest, these people, because of their acquisitions during this downturn, will be several times wealthier when we come out of this situation in a few years. So the rich are going to become the wealthy. So now I'm going to get into a point that you really need to hear, and we touched on it in another video. Producer Mac will toss a link up probably here or here. We'll make sure you get it. And I suggest, it's only like 4 or 5 minutes. Please listen to it. It explains like country and world GNP, GDP, a balanced market, what inflation is, and basically what is a recession. But I'm going to go into this really quickly here just to tie into my next point. Since roughly 2010, after the 0809 collapse, the world, don't just think America, North America, the world has been artificially inflating their economies by printing money that isn't tied to a commodity. Back in the day, it was tied to a physical amount of a precious metal. We've got $100 million here, we've got $100 million worth of gold. They cover each other. Now it's just printed and sent out. But just since 2010, the countries around the world have combined to have printed as much as $35 to $38 trillion, not backed by any commodity. Compare that to the global annual market revenue of just over $80 trillion. So almost half of the revenue generated globally in 1 year is not backed by an asset. Let me go back to that. A number equivalent to half of the revenue generated globally in 1 year is not backed by an asset, and therefore has no tangible value. This means that across the globe, almost half a year's revenue has to be eliminated to bring markets and inflation into balance. Now, if that doesn't scare you, or at least make you wake up and start doing a bit of research, I want you to search 2 terms: quantitative tightening of a country's market budget, so you can fully understand why property and markets have to drop. And the second is fractional reserve banking. Those 2 terms, if you actually read up on them, will tell you everything you need to know about why we keep making mistakes, and each time we do it, we get further and further into trouble. Especially the fractional reserve banking. When you find out how much currency is out in the world right now that's not tied to anything, you understand how things collapse. So why did we bother making this episode? Well, back to our first point. Internally in our groups and the people we talk to and we invest with, I'm not giving you advice. just know that we will not be making any large personal purchases for the next 20 to 24 months. That means no personal property, no personal pleasure craft, anything that could possibly depreciate. Property will be a huge one. Because if you don't know how to invest in property properly, doing it and purchasing it right now is going to, we're past the height of the market. It's actually on its way down. I don't care what any realtor says. If you look at Las Vegas, which is pretty much the standard for, we'll call it America, which then translates into kind of what happens all the way across North America. Las Vegas property has already taken a substantial downturn. The reason Vegas is the first area to look at is because when there's excess money, people start picking up properties that they can Airbnb, rent out, make, it's an investment. But it's also the first thing people ditch when they need to recover some money and they don't want to lose. They want to extract as much as they can out of that property. So Vegas is the best judge. So if you ever want to know what's going on, just read the previous month's Vegas residential real estate transactions. Is it up? Is it down? What percentages? There's an easy way. But anything else, please don't be buying any RVs at high interest rates. Please don't be buying any boats, motorcycles. Please, I would suggest you don't even purchase new vehicles for the next 2 years. They're still trying to come down to the price they were pre-pandemic. And just to give you an example on these vehicles, I drive a Lexus NX. It's only a couple of years old. It's essentially here in Canada a $58,000 vehicle. Well, over the pandemic, because supply and demand, which was kind of played against us, auto manufacturers just found out, wow, it started out that we didn't have enough staff to pump out enough vehicles, but people were still buying. They were still getting on waiting lists, but the difference was they're actually putting up deposits to guarantee that they're going to pay more because of supply and demand. There's enough supply. They've just found out that they don't have to put 200 units on a lot and have that holding cost. They can make you wait, and you're more than happy to do it, so much so that you'll pay 20% too much for a vehicle. Now let's loop back to it. Now is the used car market. The repos have been happening in full force for the last 4 to 5 months. And I just told you, my NX was a $58,000 US vehicle. Not super high end, but during the pandemic, you'd have to put your deposit down if you wanted a new one, and some people were paying over $70K. So if you got that vehicle for $70K, and now vehicles are settling back out because supply is coming up and demand's kind of settling out because people don't have the extra money, that is a typically, at that point, 40 after 2-3 years, it's a $42,000 to $44,000 vehicle. But if you had to default on your payments because you couldn't pay for them and you were paying it down from 70 or 72 and you're only at 65, you still owe the bank $65,000 for a vehicle that should have only been 58 new, so they now have to take it to a repo auction and try and get 58 out of it, and it's back down to where it was 3 years ago, which was you'd be lucky to get 48 at a dealership for that particular vehicle. I've tried bidding on them online. The banks aren't even accepting anything anywhere near where the used market should be. So all this money is not being recovered. You may not have access to that type of number, but I just broke it down for you as far as depreciating assets. And I'm not picking on Lexus or Toyota because they actually have the highest resale values, but I'm just telling you that even in a situation like that, everything is messed. And why we're not going to be buying any personal large value items for the next 20 to 24 months. Okay, I know I rambled on. That wasn't supposed to be this long. Some of this may get edited out. I'm not exactly sure. But please, that link that producer Mac's going to link up there, listen to that. It's less than 5 minutes. You need to understand what this recession is going to do. And by all means, put a question in the comment section. We will get back to you within a few hours. But for now, I'm Chris, producer Mac, All I Ever Wanted podcast. We're out.